When Director of Operations David Chen told me during a board meeting that women lack the emotional stability to run major corporations, I said nothing. I just quietly documented every dismissive comment, every undermining decision, and every instance of gender bias. 3 years later, he reports directly to me as the CEO of Global Dynamics Corporation, the same company where he once questioned whether I belonged in leadership at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Alexandra Martinez stood before the polished marble mirror in the executive washroom of Global Dynamics Corporation's 42nd floor, her reflection illuminated by the warm LED lighting that cast no harsh shadows. The bathroom itself represented everything she had worked toward, yet felt excluded from: Italian marble countertops, fresh orchids replaced weekly, and an atmosphere of understated luxury that whispered of executive privilege and corporate power. Her navy blue blazer, tailored to perfection, conveyed authority and competence, yet she felt like an imposter in this space reserved for senior leadership. The brass nameplate on her temporary office read, Alexandra Martinez, Senior Financial Analyst. But the title felt insufficient to describe the complexity of her role or the scope of her contributions to the company's success. She had been occupying executive-level responsibilities while maintaining a mid-level designation, a common experience for ambitious women who found themselves managing upward while being held back from formal advancement. The reflection staring back revealed a woman who had carefully constructed her professional image to navigate corporate hierarchies that often questioned whether women possessed the requisite qualities for leadership positions. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that balanced professionalism with approachability, and her minimal makeup suggested competence without drawing attention to her femininity in ways that might be interpreted as weakness or distraction. Every detail of her appearance had been calibrated through years of observing which presentations of professional women were taken seriously, and which were dismissed as either too aggressive or insufficiently authoritative. Global Dynamics Corporation occupied 12 floors of Seattle's most prestigious business district, serving as headquarters for a technology consulting firm that specialized in digital transformation for Fortune 500 companies. The company had grown from a small startup to a major industry player through strategic acquisitions, innovative service offerings, and a reputation for delivering complex projects that other firms could not handle. The corporate culture prided itself on meritocracy and results-driven advancement. Yet Alexandra had observed significant disparities in how merit was recognized and rewarded based on gender, communication style, and social networks that often excluded women from informal power structures. The executive floor where Alexandra now stood represented the pinnacle of corporate achievement within the organization. Only the most senior leaders maintained offices on this level, enjoying panoramic views of Elliott Bay, private meeting rooms, and access to amenities that reinforced their status within the organizational hierarchy. The executive washroom served as a daily reminder of her proximity to true power, while highlighting the barriers that prevented her from fully accessing it, despite her qualifications and contributions. Alexandra had arrived at Global Dynamics 5 years earlier, with an MBA from Northwestern Kellogg and 8 years of experience in management consulting at Tier 1 firms. Her background included successful engagements with major corporations, recognized expertise in organizational restructuring, and a track record of delivering measurable results for complex transformation initiatives. She had been recruited specifically to lead the financial analysis team for the company's most challenging client engagements, a role that required sophisticated analytical skills, strategic thinking, and the ability to manage multiple stakeholder relationships simultaneously. The position had initially seemed like an ideal opportunity to leverage her expertise, while gaining exposure to the technology consulting industry. Global Dynamics offered competitive compensation, opportunities for international travel, and the promise of rapid advancement for high performers. The company's leadership emphasized their commitment to diversity and inclusion, featuring professional women prominently in marketing materials and corporate communications that suggested gender equality was a core organizational value. Yet the reality of daily operations revealed subtle but persistent patterns that systematically disadvantaged women seeking advancement to senior leadership positions. Meeting dynamics consistently favored male colleagues who interrupted female speakers, appropriated ideas without attribution, and received credit for collaborative solutions that emerged from diverse team input. Client relationship management opportunities were preferentially assigned to men based on assumptions about client preferences and comfort levels that were rarely tested or validated through actual client feedback. The most challenging aspect of navigating this environment was the constant requirement to prove competence and legitimacy in ways that male colleagues simply did not experience. Alexandra found herself needing to provide more detailed justifications for her recommendations, endure more skeptical questioning of her analyses, and demonstrate expertise more extensively before receiving the same level of credibility that men achieved through positional authority alone. This additional emotional and intellectual labor was exhausting and time-consuming, yet it remained largely invisible to colleagues who did not experience similar challenges. David Chen represented the epitome of these systemic barriers, disguised as individual personality traits or leadership preferences. As Director of Operations, he wielded significant influence over project assignments, resource allocation, and advancement opportunities throughout the organization. His management style emphasized decisive action, hierarchical communication, and what he characterized as objective, data-driven decision-making that eliminated emotional considerations from business judgment. These preferences, while seemingly neutral, consistently favored approaches and communication styles more commonly associated with male professionals, while disadvantaging collaborative, relationship-focused strategies that research demonstrated were equally effective for achieving business objectives. The relationship between Alexandra and David had deteriorated gradually through a series of interactions that individually seemed minor, but collectively created a hostile environment that questioned her fitness for leadership roles. He routinely interrupted her during presentations, redirected questions about her analyses to male colleagues, and made subtle comments about emotional decision-making whenever she advocated for approaches that considered human factors alongside financial metrics. These behaviors were calibrated to appear professional, while systematically undermining her authority and credibility with clients and internal stakeholders. The executive washroom encounter that morning had provided Alexandra with a moment of clarity about her situation and the broader organizational dynamics that had shaped her experience. She had overheard a conversation between David and another senior leader discussing her candidacy for a promotion to Vice President of Strategic Planning, a position that would have provided the platform and authority to implement changes she believed were essential for the company's continued growth and competitive positioning. David's comments during this private conversation revealed attitudes about women in leadership that contradicted his public statements supporting diversity and inclusion. He had expressed concerns about her emotional stability during high-pressure situations, questioned whether clients would respect her authority, and suggested that her collaborative leadership style indicated weakness rather than strategic relationship management. Most damaging was his assertion that women fundamentally lacked the psychological makeup required for senior executive positions, particularly roles that involved tough decisions about layoffs, budget cuts, or strategic pivots that might negatively impact employee morale. These comments crystallized years of subtle discrimination into a clear pattern of gender bias that had been constraining her advancement despite exceptional performance reviews, client satisfaction scores, and measurable contributions to company profitability. Alexandra realized that her strategy of proving herself through superior performance and patient navigation of organizational politics had been fundamentally flawed, because it failed to address the underlying assumptions that prevented women from being perceived as legitimate candidates for senior leadership positions. The reflection in the executive washroom mirror showed a woman who had gradually internalized many of these limiting beliefs about her own capabilities and appropriate professional aspirations. She had learned to doubt her instincts, moderate her communication style, and accept that advancement would require extraordinary effort and patience compared to male colleagues with similar qualifications. The careful construction of her professional image represented an attempt to minimize gender-based objections to her advancement, yet this strategy had inadvertently reinforced the very stereotypes it was designed to overcome. Standing in this symbol of executive privilege, Alexandra experienced a profound shift in her understanding of her own potential and the strategies required to achieve her professional goals. The woman in the mirror was no longer someone seeking acceptance and validation from organizational gatekeepers who would never fully embrace her leadership potential. Instead, she saw someone with the knowledge, skills, and determination to challenge the systems that maintained artificial barriers to advancement, while creating opportunities for herself and other talented women who deserved recognition based on merit rather than gender-based assumptions. The executive washroom, with its marble surfaces and luxury amenities, had been designed to reinforce hierarchical distinctions and executive privilege. Yet for Alexandra, it became the site of a transformative realization about her own worth, and the possibility of fundamentally altering the power dynamics that had constrained her career progression. The reflection in the mirror no longer showed someone seeking permission to lead, but someone preparing to claim the authority and position that her qualifications and contributions had already earned. This moment of recognition represented more than personal awakening. It marked the beginning of a strategic campaign to demonstrate that women could not only succeed in senior leadership positions, but could transform organizational culture and business performance in ways that traditional masculine leadership approaches had failed to achieve. The careful documentation of discriminatory comments and behaviors that she had been maintaining would serve as evidence, but more importantly, her future actions would provide undeniable proof of women's capacity for executive excellence. The mirror reflected someone ready to move beyond defensive responses to gender bias toward proactive demonstration of leadership capabilities that could not be ignored, dismissed, or attributed to factors other than genuine competence and strategic vision. The executive washroom had inadvertently become the birthplace of a transformation that would ultimately place her in a position to influence organizational culture and advancement opportunities for future generations of professional women, who deserved the same recognition and opportunities that had been routinely extended to their male counterparts. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The moment of clarity that occurred in this space of executive privilege would prove to be the catalyst for a journey that challenged not only individual career limitations, but broader assumptions about women's fitness for senior leadership roles in corporate America. The reflection in the marble mirror had shown Alexandra Martinez not just who she was, but who she was capable of becoming when she stopped seeking permission and started claiming the authority that her expertise and contributions had already established. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories that matter. If you believe that competence and vision should determine leadership opportunities regardless of gender, please consider subscribing. It costs nothing and helps us reach more women who need to hear that their professional aspirations are valid and achievable. Now let us see how this transformation unfolds. Global Dynamics Corporation operated as a sophisticated ecosystem, where power flowed through carefully constructed channels that appeared meritocratic on the surface, while maintaining deeply entrenched barriers to advancement for women and other underrepresented groups. Alexandra had spent 5 years learning to navigate this complex system, gradually recognizing that her initial assumptions about corporate advancement had been fundamentally naive. The company presented itself as a progressive organization committed to diversity and inclusion, yet the actual mechanisms of promotion, project assignment, and leadership development revealed patterns that systematically favored traditional masculine approaches to business leadership. The organizational structure of Global Dynamics reflected standard corporate hierarchies found throughout the technology consulting industry, with clearly defined levels of authority and responsibility that theoretically provided transparent pathways for advancement. Entry-level analysts progressed to senior analysts, then to managers, directors, vice presidents, and ultimately to the executive leadership team that reported directly to the chief executive officer. Entry-level. Each level required demonstrated competence in increasingly complex responsibilities, from technical analysis to client relationship management to strategic planning and organizational leadership. However, the informal power structures that actually determined advancement opportunities operated according to different principles that were rarely acknowledged in official company communications or performance review processes. Access to high-visibility projects, mentorship relationships with senior leaders, and inclusion in strategic planning discussions depended heavily on social networks, communication styles, and cultural fit assessments that consistently disadvantaged women who did not conform to traditional masculine leadership behaviors. The executive floor of Global Dynamics headquarters served as a physical manifestation of these power dynamics, where corner offices with panoramic views of Seattle's skyline were occupied exclusively by senior leaders who had successfully navigated the complex requirements for advancement within the organization. The floor plan itself communicated hierarchical relationships through office size, furniture quality, and proximity to the boardroom where strategic decisions were made. Support staff, predominantly women, occupied workstations in open areas that provided administrative assistance to executives while remaining physically and symbolically separated from actual decision-making processes. Alexandra had observed these spatial arrangements with increasing awareness of how environmental design reinforced organizational hierarchies and influenced psychological perceptions of authority and competence. The executive conference room featured leather chairs arranged around a mahogany table that could accommodate 20 participants, yet meetings rarely included more than 8 attendees, all of whom were senior leaders who had achieved their positions through successful navigation of both formal requirements and informal selection processes that favored specific demographic profiles and behavioral patterns. The meeting dynamics within this executive conference room revealed subtle but consistent patterns that disadvantaged women seeking advancement to senior leadership positions. Conversations proceeded according to unwritten rules about appropriate communication styles, with direct assertiveness valued over collaborative approaches, competitive individualism favored over team-oriented solutions, and quantitative analysis privileged over qualitative insights that considered human factors and business decision-making. Women who attempted to participate according to these masculine communication norms were often perceived as aggressive or unlikable, while those who maintained more traditionally feminine approaches were dismissed as lacking the tough-minded decisiveness required for executive leadership. David Chen had mastered these organizational dynamics through systematic observation and strategic adaptation of his behavior to align with executive expectations and preferences. His rise from senior consultant to director of operations had been facilitated by his ability to project confidence during presentations, make decisive recommendations without extensive consultation, and maintain relationships with other senior leaders through shared interests in golf, business networking events, and informal social gatherings that occurred outside normal business hours. These relationship-building opportunities were theoretically available to all employees, yet they consistently excluded women who had family responsibilities, different social interests, or discomfort with male-dominated recreational activities. The promotion process at Global Dynamics theoretically emphasized objective performance metrics, including client satisfaction scores, project profitability, team leadership effectiveness, and strategic contributions to organizational growth. Yet the actual selection decisions were heavily influenced by subjective assessments of executive presence, cultural fit, and leadership potential that reflected unconscious biases about gender-appropriate behaviors and capabilities. Performance reviews consistently praised women for their collaborative skills, attention to detail, and relationship management abilities, while questioning their capacity for strategic thinking, decisive action, and tough decision-making under pressure. Alexandra had experienced these biased assessment patterns throughout her tenure at the company, receiving exceptional ratings for technical competence and client relationship management, while consistently being counseled to develop more assertive communication styles and strategic thinking capabilities. The feedback implied that her current strengths were valuable but insufficient for advancement to senior leadership positions that required different behavioral profiles and decision-making approaches. This developmental guidance positioned her gender-associated strengths as limitations rather than recognizing them as complementary capabilities that could enhance organizational effectiveness when combined with traditional masculine leadership approaches. The client engagement process at Global Dynamics provided additional evidence of systematic gender bias in opportunity allocation and recognition of professional competence. Major client relationships were typically managed by senior male leaders who were assumed to possess the gravitas and authority necessary for handling multi-million-dollar consulting engagements. Women were more commonly assigned to project management roles that required exceptional organizational skills and attention to detail, but provided limited visibility with client decision-makers and minimal opportunities for developing the external relationships that often led to career advancement opportunities. When women did participate in client presentations, they frequently encountered assumptions about their roles and capabilities that required constant navigation and correction. Clients often directed technical questions to male colleagues, even when women possessed superior expertise in relevant areas. Women's recommendations were subjected to more skeptical questioning and required additional validation from male team members before being accepted as credible. These patterns placed additional emotional and intellectual burden on women who had to prove their competence repeatedly, while managing the psychological stress of operating in environments where their authority was constantly questioned. The compensation structure at Global Dynamics reflected these differential treatment patterns through gender pay gaps that persisted across all organizational levels despite company policies promoting pay equity and transparent salary administration. Women consistently earned less than male colleagues with comparable experience, education, and performance ratings, with the disparities increasing at higher organizational levels, where subjective assessments of leadership potential played larger roles in determining compensation packages. Annual salary reviews provided opportunities to address these inequities, yet the incremental adjustments rarely eliminated existing gaps and failed to account for the cumulative impact of years of differential treatment. The networking opportunities that facilitated advancement at Global Dynamics occurred primarily through informal social interactions that systematically excluded women from important relationship-building activities. Business development efforts were frequently conducted at golf courses, private clubs, and after-hours social events that assumed participants had flexible schedules and interests, aligned with traditional masculine recreational preferences. Women who attempted to participate in these activities often found themselves marginalized through subtle social dynamics that made their presence feel awkward or inappropriate despite official inclusion policies. Professional development opportunities at Global Dynamics were theoretically available to all employees through structured programs, external training, and conference attendance that supported skill development and industry knowledge advancement. However, access to high-profile development experiences, including executive education programs and international assignments, was influenced by informal selection processes that favored employees who had established relationships with senior leaders and demonstrated cultural fit with organizational expectations. Women were more likely to be selected for programs focused on communication skills and emotional intelligence, rather than strategic leadership and business development opportunities that provided more direct preparation for executive advancement. The board of directors at Global Dynamics included 2 women among 12 total members, reflecting industry patterns of limited female representation in corporate governance roles. Both women had achieved senior executive positions in other organizations and brought valuable expertise to board discussions, yet their contributions were often minimized or ignored during strategic planning processes that emphasized quantitative analysis over qualitative insights about market trends, organizational culture, and stakeholder relationship management. Their presence served primarily symbolic purposes that allowed the company to claim commitment to diversity while maintaining decision-making processes that reflected predominantly masculine perspectives on business strategy and organizational leadership. The company's diversity and inclusion initiatives represented well-intentioned efforts to address recognized problems with advancement opportunities for women and other underrepresented groups. These programs included mentorship opportunities, leadership development workshops, flexible work arrangements, and unconscious bias training that aimed to create more equitable organizational culture and advancement processes. However, these initiatives operated as supplementary programs rather than fundamental changes to organizational systems, allowing existing power structures to remain intact, while creating an appearance of progressive commitment to equality and inclusion. Alexandra had participated in several of these diversity programs, finding them valuable for networking with other professional women and developing skills that enhanced her effectiveness in navigating organizational challenges. Yet she had also observed how these programs inadvertently reinforced assumptions that women required additional support and development to succeed in corporate environments, rather than addressing the systemic barriers that created artificial obstacles to advancement for qualified professionals regardless of gender. The technology consulting industry context within which Global Dynamics operated reflected broader patterns of gender inequality in professional services, where women comprised approximately 40% of entry-level positions, but less than 20% of senior leadership roles. These industry-wide patterns suggested that organizational barriers were not unique to Global Dynamics, but represented systemic challenges that required coordinated efforts across multiple companies and professional associations to address effectively. The competitive dynamics within the technology consulting industry emphasized client relationship management, technical expertise, and strategic problem-solving capabilities that women possessed in equal measure to their male colleagues. Yet the business development processes, client engagement approaches, and leadership advancement criteria reflected assumptions about gender-appropriate behaviors and capabilities that consistently disadvantaged women seeking advancement to senior executive positions. These patterns perpetuated themselves through recruitment practices, promotion decisions, and organizational culture development that maintained traditional masculine definitions of leadership effectiveness and professional competence. Understanding these comprehensive systemic barriers had been essential for Alexandra's recognition that individual excellence and patient navigation of organizational politics would be insufficient for achieving her professional aspirations. The corporate hierarchy at Global Dynamics was not a neutral system that rewarded merit regardless of gender, but rather a complex network of formal and informal processes that maintained existing power relationships while creating the appearance of fair and objective advancement opportunities. Recognizing this reality had been painful but necessary for developing more effective strategies for achieving meaningful change in her career trajectory and broader organizational culture. The executive washroom revelation had crystallized years of observations about these systemic barriers into a clear understanding that fundamental change would require challenging the assumptions and processes that maintained gender inequality, rather than simply working harder to prove her competence within existing systems. The marble mirror had reflected not only her own potential but also the necessity of transforming organizational culture to create genuine opportunities for advancement based on merit, rather than gender-based stereotypes and biases that limited the full utilization of talent within the organization. This comprehensive understanding of the corporate hierarchy and its barriers would prove essential for developing the strategic approach that would ultimately enable Alexandra to achieve positions of authority where she could influence organizational culture and advancement opportunities for future generations of professional women who deserved recognition based on their capabilities, rather than conformity to traditional masculine leadership behaviors and expectations. Alexandra Martinez had carried a vision of transformational leadership since her undergraduate years at Stanford University, where she had first encountered the concept that business organizations could serve as vehicles for positive social change while achieving exceptional financial performance. This vision had been shaped by professors who demonstrated how strategic thinking, ethical decision-making, and inclusive management approaches could create sustainable competitive advantages that benefited all stakeholders, rather than simply maximizing shareholder returns at the expense of employee welfare and community development. The leadership philosophy that had crystallized during her MBA studies at Northwestern Kellogg emphasized the integration of analytical rigor with emotional intelligence, strategic planning with collaborative execution, and profit maximization with social responsibility. Alexandra had been particularly influenced by case studies of companies that had achieved remarkable growth through cultures of innovation, employee empowerment, and customer-centric service delivery that created lasting value rather than short-term financial gains. These examples had convinced her that traditional command and control leadership approaches were becoming obsolete in rapidly changing business environments that required adaptive, learning-oriented organizations capable of continuous evolution. Her early career experiences at premier management consulting firms had provided opportunities to observe various leadership styles and organizational cultures across dozens of client engagements. These experiences had reinforced her conviction that the most successful companies were those led by executives who could balance competing priorities, navigate complex stakeholder relationships, and inspire teams to achieve extraordinary results through shared vision and collaborative effort rather than hierarchical authority and individual performance pressure. The vision that sustained Alexandra through years of corporate navigation involved creating an organizational culture where talent would be recognized and developed, regardless of gender, background, or communication style. She imagined leading a company where strategic decisions would be informed by diverse perspectives, where innovation would emerge from inclusive collaboration, and where success would be measured not only by financial metrics but also by employee engagement, client satisfaction, and positive impact on broader business communities. This leadership vision had been deeply personal as well as professional, reflecting her own experiences as a woman navigating male-dominated corporate environments where her capabilities had been consistently undervalued despite exceptional performance and measurable contributions to organizational success. She had witnessed countless talented women plateau in middle management positions or leave corporate environments entirely due to systemic barriers that prevented them from accessing opportunities commensurate with their qualifications and potential. The specific circumstances that had inspired Alexandra's leadership aspirations traced back to her childhood observations of her mother's career struggles as a brilliant engineer who had been repeatedly passed over for management positions, despite superior technical expertise and innovative problem-solving abilities. Her mother had eventually left corporate employment to start her own consulting firm, achieving remarkable success while maintaining work-life integration that traditional corporate structures had made impossible. This example had demonstrated both the artificial nature of corporate barriers and the extraordinary potential that could be unleashed when talented individuals found environments that recognized and supported their capabilities. Alexandra's undergraduate internships at technology companies had provided early exposure to organizational cultures that either empowered or constrained individual potential based on leadership philosophies and management practices. She had observed how inclusive leaders could create environments where diverse teams produced innovative solutions that exceeded expectations, while authoritarian managers generated compliance but limited creativity and engagement. These experiences had convinced her that leadership effectiveness was largely determined by the ability to create conditions where others could perform at their highest levels, rather than commanding obedience through positional authority. Her graduate studies had provided theoretical frameworks for understanding these observations, particularly through coursework in organizational behavior, change management, and strategic leadership, that emphasized the importance of culture, communication, and shared vision in achieving sustainable business success. She had been particularly drawn to research demonstrating that diverse leadership teams made better decisions, that inclusive organizational cultures attracted and retained superior talent, and that companies led by women often outperformed their competitors on multiple performance metrics, including profitability, employee satisfaction, and customer loyalty. The leadership vision that had emerged from this combination of personal experience, academic study, and professional observation centered on the concept of transformational leadership that could simultaneously achieve exceptional business results while creating positive change for employees, clients, and broader business communities. Alexandra had imagined herself leading an organization where strategic thinking would be enhanced by diverse perspectives, where innovation would flourish through collaborative creativity, and where success would be defined by sustainable value creation rather than short-term financial optimization. This vision had been particularly compelling because it aligned with her personal values while addressing the systemic problems she had observed throughout her corporate career. She had witnessed how traditional masculine leadership approaches often created competitive internal cultures that discouraged collaboration, limited innovation, and generated high turnover among talented employees who sought more meaningful and supportive work environments. Her leadership philosophy emphasized the creation of organizational cultures where individual success would be interconnected with team achievement and where company performance would be enhanced rather than constrained by commitment to employee development and community engagement. The practical manifestation of Alexandra's leadership vision involved implementing management practices that would maximize both human potential and business performance through integrated approaches to strategy development, operational execution, and organizational culture. She had envisioned leading strategic planning processes that would incorporate insights from employees at all organizational levels, creating innovation initiatives that would leverage diverse perspectives and experiences, and developing talent management systems that would recognize and advance individuals based on demonstrated capabilities rather than demographic characteristics or communication styles. Her approach to client relationship management had been shaped by the belief that consulting engagements should create lasting value for client organizations, rather than simply delivering reports and recommendations that might be ignored or implemented superficially. She had imagined leading a consulting firm that would work collaboratively with clients to build internal capabilities, transfer knowledge effectively, and ensure sustainable implementation of strategic changes that would continue generating benefits long after consulting engagements concluded. The financial aspects of Alexandra's leadership vision emphasized sustainable profitability through superior service delivery, client satisfaction, and employee engagement, rather than cost reduction strategies that might compromise quality or organizational culture. She had studied companies that had achieved exceptional financial performance through investment in employee development, innovation initiatives, and long-term client relationships that generated recurring revenue and referral opportunities. This approach required patience and strategic thinking that prioritized long-term value creation over quarterly performance optimization, but it produced more sustainable competitive advantages and stakeholder satisfaction. Alexandra's vision for organizational culture emphasized psychological safety, collaborative problem-solving, and continuous learning that would enable individuals and teams to perform at their highest levels, while maintaining personal well-being and professional satisfaction. She had observed how fear-based management approaches generated compliance, but limited creativity, innovation, and engagement, while supportive environments that encouraged calculated risk-taking and learning from failure produced superior results and employee retention. The community impact dimension of her leadership vision involved using business success as a platform for positive social change through responsible employment practices, community engagement initiatives, and industry leadership that would influence broader adoption of inclusive management approaches. Alexandra had been inspired by examples of companies that had used their market position and resources to address social problems, support educational initiatives, and demonstrate that business success and social responsibility were complementary rather than competing objectives. Her approach to diversity and inclusion went beyond compliance with legal requirements or implementation of awareness programs to encompass fundamental changes in organizational systems, processes, and culture that would create genuine equality of opportunity and advancement based on merit rather than demographic characteristics. She had envisioned leading an organization where diverse perspectives would be valued for their contribution to better decision-making and innovation, rather than viewed as obstacles to organizational efficiency or cultural cohesion. The personal fulfillment that Alexandra anticipated from achieving her leadership vision involved the satisfaction of creating positive change for others, while demonstrating that women could be exceptionally effective executives who enhanced rather than compromised organizational performance. She had been motivated by the prospect of serving as a role model for other professional women who had experienced similar barriers and limitations, proving that gender-based assumptions about leadership capabilities were both inaccurate and counterproductive for organizations seeking sustainable success. Her vision had been sustained through years of organizational obstacles and personal setbacks by the conviction that her leadership approach could produce superior results compared to traditional masculine management styles that dominated most corporate environments. She had maintained detailed observations of management practices and their consequences, noting how inclusive leaders consistently achieved better outcomes in terms of employee engagement, innovation, customer satisfaction, and financial performance, compared to authoritarian approaches that relied primarily on hierarchical authority and individual accountability. The strategic thinking component of Alexandra's leadership vision emphasized long-term planning, stakeholder relationship management, and adaptive responses to changing market conditions that would position organizations for sustained success rather than short-term optimization that might compromise future competitiveness. She had studied how successful companies balanced competing priorities, managed complex stakeholder relationships, and maintained strategic focus while remaining flexible enough to capitalize on unexpected opportunities or respond effectively to external challenges. Her approach to talent development emphasized identifying and nurturing individual strengths while providing opportunities for growth and advancement that would benefit both employees and organizational performance. Alexandra had observed how traditional development approaches often attempted to correct perceived weaknesses rather than amplifying natural capabilities, resulting in mediocre performance and employee dissatisfaction. Her vision involved creating development systems that would help individuals maximize their unique contributions while building complementary teams that could achieve extraordinary collective results. The innovation aspects of Alexandra's leadership vision focused on creating organizational cultures that would encourage creative problem-solving, calculated risk-taking, and continuous improvement that would maintain competitive advantages in rapidly evolving business environments. She had studied how innovative companies fostered cultures where new ideas were welcomed, experiments were encouraged, and failures were treated as learning opportunities rather than reasons for punishment or career limitations. This comprehensive leadership vision had remained vivid and compelling despite years of organizational barriers and systematic exclusion from advancement opportunities that would have provided platforms for implementation. The vision served as both inspiration and source of frustration, reminding Alexandra of the positive impact she could create, while highlighting the artificial constraints that prevented her from accessing positions where transformational leadership could be implemented effectively. The persistence of this vision, through years of corporate obstacles, demonstrated both her commitment to positive change and her confidence that alternative leadership approaches could produce superior results when given genuine opportunities for implementation. The quarterly board meeting of Global Dynamics Corporation convened precisely at 9 o'clock on the morning of March 15 in the executive conference room that overlooked Elliott Bay through floor-to-ceiling windows. The mahogany table reflected the morning light streaming across Seattle's business district, creating an atmosphere of corporate gravitas that befitted discussions of strategic direction and organizational leadership for one of the region's most influential technology consulting firms. Alexandra Martinez had been invited to present the quarterly financial analysis and strategic recommendations that would inform critical decisions about market expansion, resource allocation, and executive succession planning for the coming fiscal year. The board composition reflected the traditional demographic patterns of corporate governance in the technology consulting industry, with 10 male members and 2 female representatives who brought distinguished credentials from successful careers in finance, operations, and strategic consulting. Estoib. Board Chairman Robert Steinberg had built his reputation through successful leadership of 3 major corporations, while the other members represented diverse expertise in areas including private equity, international business development, regulatory compliance, and digital transformation strategy. The collective experience around the table encompassed decades of corporate leadership and hundreds of billions in combined revenue management across multiple industries and geographic markets. Alexandra had spent 6 weeks preparing for this presentation, recognizing that the quarterly board meeting represented her most significant opportunity to demonstrate strategic thinking capabilities and executive presence to the individuals who would ultimately influence advancement decisions throughout the organization. Her analysis addressed market opportunities in emerging technology sectors, competitive positioning relative to industry leaders, operational efficiency improvements that could enhance profitability, and talent management strategies that could support sustainable growth while maintaining the organizational culture that had contributed to Global Dynamics' success in attracting and retaining exceptional professionals. The presentation materials included comprehensive financial modeling that projected revenue growth scenarios under different strategic assumptions, competitive analysis that identified opportunities for market share expansion, and operational recommendations that could improve project delivery efficiency while enhancing client satisfaction scores. Alexandra had integrated quantitative analysis with qualitative insights about industry trends, client preferences, and organizational capabilities that positioned Global Dynamics to capitalize on emerging opportunities, while mitigating potential risks associated with rapid expansion or strategic pivots. Her strategic recommendations emphasize the importance of inclusive leadership development, diverse team composition, and collaborative client engagement approaches that research demonstrated could enhance innovation, improve decision-making quality, and generate superior financial performance compared to traditional hierarchical management structures. The presentation incorporated case studies of companies that had achieved exceptional results through implementation of inclusive management practices, along with specific recommendations for organizational changes that could position Global Dynamics as an industry leader in both financial performance and progressive workplace culture. The initial reception of Alexandra's presentation had been positive, with board members asking thoughtful questions about implementation timelines, resource requirements, and potential challenges associated with the strategic recommendations. Several members commented favorably on the sophistication of her analysis and the practical feasibility of her proposed initiatives. The discussion proceeded according to familiar patterns of strategic dialogue, with participants examining assumptions, exploring alternative scenarios, and evaluating the potential consequences of different strategic directions. The transformation of this professional discussion into a defining moment of gender bias occurred when the conversation shifted to organizational leadership development and executive succession planning. Board member Margaret Chen had raised questions about the company's progress in developing diverse leadership talent, noting that Global Dynamics had lagged behind industry benchmarks in promoting women and other underrepresented groups to senior executive positions, despite official commitments to diversity and inclusion. David Chen had responded to these concerns by expressing skepticism about the effectiveness of diversity initiatives in improving business performance, arguing that merit-based advancement systems already ensured that the most qualified candidates achieved leadership positions regardless of demographic characteristics. His comments reflected common misconceptions about the nature of systemic barriers and the relationship between inclusive management practices and organizational effectiveness. But they were delivered with the confident authority that characterized his typical contributions to strategic discussions. The catalyst moment emerged when Margaret Chen challenged David's assertions by citing research demonstrating that diverse leadership teams consistently outperformed homogeneous groups on multiple performance metrics, including financial returns, innovation measures, and stakeholder satisfaction scores. She specifically referenced Alexandra's presentation as evidence that the company possessed exceptional talent that could contribute significantly to strategic leadership roles if provided with appropriate advancement opportunities. David's response to this challenge revealed attitudes about women in leadership that contradicted his public statements supporting diversity and professional development for all employees. His voice carried the dismissive tone reserved for discussions of topics he considered peripheral to serious business strategy, and his body language conveyed impatience with what he apparently viewed as political correctness rather than strategic necessity. With all due respect, Margaret, I think we need to be realistic about the psychological and emotional requirements of senior executive positions, David stated while leaning back in his leather chair with the confident posture of someone who assumed his perspectives would be received as authoritative insights rather than personal opinions. The technology consulting industry operates under intense pressure, with demanding clients, tight deadlines, and high-stakes decisions that require leaders who can maintain objectivity and make tough choices without being swayed by emotional considerations. The conference room fell silent as board members processed the implications of his comments, recognizing that he was articulating assumptions about gender-based leadership capabilities that most organizations had officially rejected decades earlier. Alexandra felt her heart rate increase as she realized that David was about to reveal attitudes that would fundamentally alter her understanding of the barriers she had been navigating throughout her career at Global Dynamics. Women tend to approach business decisions with emotional frameworks that can compromise the analytical rigor required for effective strategic leadership, David continued, apparently oblivious to the shocked expressions appearing on several board members' faces. They often prioritize consensus building and relationship management over decisive action, which can be problematic when organizations need leaders who can implement difficult decisions quickly and efficiently. Margaret Chen interrupted with obvious displeasure, pointing out that research consistently demonstrated the effectiveness of collaborative leadership approaches, and questioning the factual basis for his assertions about gender-based decision-making patterns. Her intervention provided an opportunity for David to reconsider his statements and acknowledge the inappropriate nature of his generalizations, but instead he doubled down on his position with even more explicit claims about women's fundamental unsuitability for senior executive roles. Look, I'm not trying to be controversial here, but we have to acknowledge biological and psychological realities, David replied, with the patronizing tone of someone explaining obvious facts to colleagues who were apparently too naive or politically constrained to recognize them. Women are naturally more emotional in their decision-making processes, which makes them excellent at relationship management and team coordination, but less effective at the kind of tough-minded strategic thinking that CEO positions require. The silence that followed this statement stretched for what felt like minutes as board members exchanged glances that communicated shared disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Alexandra realized that David had inadvertently provided definitive evidence of the gender bias that had been constraining advancement opportunities throughout the organization, revealing attitudes that explained patterns of discrimination she had experienced but never been able to prove definitively. Furthermore, David continued, apparently interpreting the silence as agreement rather than shock, our clients expect to work with senior leaders who project authority and confidence in high-pressure situations. Women often lack the emotional stability required for managing crisis situations or delivering disappointing news to major clients. Their natural tendency toward empathy and relationship preservation can compromise the objective decision-making that consulting clients are paying for. Robert Steinberg finally broke the stunned silence by asking David to clarify whether he was suggesting that women were inherently incapable of effective executive leadership, providing him with another opportunity to modify his position or acknowledge the inappropriate nature of his comments. Instead, David seized this opening to articulate his position even more explicitly, apparently convinced that he was providing valuable strategic insights that the board needed to consider. I'm saying that we need to be honest about the psychological and emotional requirements of senior leadership positions, particularly in our industry where clients are predominantly male executives who expect to work with leaders who understand how to operate in competitive, results-oriented environments. David stated with the conviction of someone who believed he was sharing crucial strategic intelligence. Women can be excellent contributors at operational levels, but CEO positions require a different psychological makeup that emphasizes decisive action over collaborative consensus building. Alexandra watched this conversation unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination, recognizing that David was destroying his own credibility while simultaneously providing her with undeniable evidence of the systemic gender bias that had been shaping organizational decisions throughout her tenure at Global Dynamics. His comments were being recorded in official board meeting minutes, witnessed by distinguished corporate leaders who served on multiple boards, and delivered with sufficient clarity to eliminate any possibility of misinterpretation or denial. The board members' responses revealed the profound inappropriateness of David's statements and their recognition that his attitudes represented significant legal and ethical liabilities for the organization. Margaret Chen expressed outrage at his assertions and demanded immediate clarification of whether his views reflected broader organizational culture at Global Dynamics. Other board members asked pointed questions about how these attitudes might have influenced previous promotion decisions and whether the company faced potential discrimination lawsuits from employees who had been affected by similar biases. Robert Steinberg attempted to restore professional decorum by noting that David's comments reflected personal opinions rather than official company positions, but the damage had been done in terms of both board confidence in current leadership and legal exposure associated with documented discrimination. The meeting devolved into damage control discussions about potential consequences and necessary remedial actions, rather than the strategic planning that had been the original agenda. Alexandra recognized that this catalyst moment represented far more than personal vindication of her experiences with gender bias. David's public articulation of discriminatory attitudes provided definitive evidence that advancement barriers at Global Dynamics were not simply the result of unconscious bias or cultural misunderstandings, but rather reflected systematic exclusion based on explicitly sexist beliefs about women's capabilities and appropriate roles within corporate hierarchies. The implications of this revelation extended beyond Alexandra's individual career prospects to encompass fundamental questions about organizational culture, legal compliance, and the effectiveness of current leadership in creating environments where all talented employees could contribute to their full potential. The board would be required to investigate whether David's attitudes had influenced hiring decisions, promotion processes, project assignments, and other aspects of human resource management that could have created patterns of discrimination affecting multiple employees. The catalyst moment also created an unprecedented opportunity for Alexandra to demonstrate the leadership capabilities that David had claimed women did not possess. Her response to this crisis situation would be observed by board members, who now possessed clear evidence of existing problems and were seeking solutions that could restore organizational credibility while preventing future discrimination incidents. The executive conference room that had begun the morning as a symbol of traditional corporate authority had been transformed into the site of a revelation that would fundamentally alter power dynamics within Global Dynamics Corporation. The mahogany table that reflected morning light now reflected the harsh illumination of discriminatory attitudes that could no longer be hidden behind professional facades or explained away as personality conflicts or communication style differences. Alexandra understood that this moment represented the decisive turning point in her career trajectory, providing both definitive evidence of the barriers she had been facing and unprecedented opportunity to demonstrate the strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and decisive leadership that would be required to address the organizational crisis that David had inadvertently created through his public expression of discriminatory beliefs about women's fitness for executive leadership positions. Alexandra Martinez sat in her office for nearly an hour after returning from the board meeting, staring at the Seattle skyline through her window while processing the profound implications of what had transpired in the executive conference room. The familiar view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond provided no comfort as her mind raced through the complex emotions and strategic considerations that David Chen's public display of gender bias had unleashed. The catalyst moment she had witnessed represented both vindication of years of suspected discrimination and an overwhelming responsibility to respond appropriately to evidence that could transform not only her own career trajectory, but the organizational culture at Global Dynamics Corporation. The immediate emotional impact of hearing her capabilities dismissed so categorically by a senior leader created a mixture of rage, validation, and profound sadness that women in corporate America continued to face such fundamental disrespect despite decades of legal protections and diversity initiatives. Alexandra found herself cycling through intense anger at the systematic nature of the discrimination she had experienced, relief at finally having concrete evidence of attitudes that had previously remained hidden behind professional facades, and deep disappointment that an organization she had served with distinction could harbor such explicitly biased leadership perspectives. The validation aspect of this emotional response proved particularly complex, as Alexandra recognized that David's statements had confirmed suspicions she had harbored for years about the true reasons for her limited advancement opportunities. The subtle patterns of exclusion, questioning of her judgment, and systematic undervaluation of her contributions now had a clear explanation that went beyond personality conflicts or communication style differences. The discrimination had been intentional and systematic, based on fundamental beliefs about women's psychological and emotional unsuitability for executive leadership roles. Yet this validation came with the sobering recognition that her individual experiences represented a broader pattern of organizational dysfunction that likely affected numerous other talented women throughout Global Dynamics. The attitudes David had expressed were not isolated personal opinions, but systematic beliefs that had undoubtedly influenced hiring decisions, promotion processes, project assignments, and performance evaluations across multiple departments and business units. Understanding the scope of this discrimination created both moral obligation and strategic opportunity to address problems that extended far beyond her personal career advancement. The strategic dimensions of her response options required careful analysis of potential consequences, available resources, and realistic assessment of her ability to create meaningful organizational change through various approaches. Alexandra understood that her reaction to this catalyst moment would define not only her future career trajectory, but also her integrity as a professional leader who possessed evidence of systematic discrimination against women seeking advancement in corporate environments. The most conservative response option involved documenting the incident through appropriate human resources channels, while continuing to focus on individual performance excellence and patient navigation of existing organizational systems. This approach would provide legal protection through formal complaint processes, while minimizing personal risk associated with challenging senior leadership directly. However, Alexandra recognized that this conservative strategy had been ineffective for addressing the underlying cultural problems that had created conditions where discriminatory attitudes could flourish unchallenged for years. The moderate response approach would involve building coalitions with other women and supportive colleagues to advocate for systematic changes in diversity and inclusion policies, leadership development programs, and performance evaluation processes. This collaborative strategy could leverage collective action to create organizational pressure for cultural change while distributing risk among multiple participants, rather than placing individual responsibility on Alexandra alone. The effectiveness of this approach would depend on identifying sufficient allies willing to support comprehensive reform initiatives despite potential career consequences. The most aggressive response strategy involved direct challenge to existing leadership through board-level advocacy, legal action, or public disclosure of discriminatory practices that would force immediate organizational accountability and leadership changes. This confrontational approach offered the greatest potential for rapid and comprehensive change, but also carried significant personal and professional risks that could result in career destruction if implemented unsuccessfully or without adequate preparation and support. Alexandra spent considerable time analyzing her qualifications and preparation for each of these strategic approaches, recognizing that her response choice would require capabilities and resources that extended beyond her technical expertise and individual determination. The conservative approach required primarily legal knowledge and documentation skills that she could develop through consultation with employment attorneys and human resources professionals. The moderate approach demanded coalition-building abilities, political acumen, and collaborative leadership skills that aligned with her natural strengths and management philosophy. The aggressive approach would require comprehensive strategic planning, extensive legal preparation, sophisticated communication strategies, and the emotional resilience necessary to withstand potential retaliation and career consequences that could be severe and long-lasting. This option also demanded careful assessment of her financial security, professional networks, and alternative career opportunities that could provide stability during what might become an extended period of organizational conflict and uncertainty. The emotional dimensions of these strategic considerations proved equally complex, as Alexandra grappled with fears about potential consequences alongside determination to address systematic problems that had limited her advancement and would likely continue affecting other talented women unless challenged effectively. Her anger at years of discrimination competed with concerns about personal and professional risks associated with various response strategies. The prospect of confronting powerful organizational leaders generated anxiety about potential retaliation, career destruction, and financial insecurity that could affect not only her individual welfare, but also her family obligations and long-term life plans. The motivational aspects of her internal struggle centered on the recognition that this catalyst moment represented a unique opportunity to demonstrate the leadership capabilities that David had claimed women did not possess. Her response to this crisis situation would be observed by board members, senior leaders, and colleagues throughout the organization who were seeking evidence of how she would handle high-pressure situations requiring strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and decisive action under challenging circumstances. Alexandra understood that responding effectively to this opportunity could provide definitive proof that women could excel in executive leadership roles while addressing systematic barriers that had prevented other talented professionals from achieving positions commensurate with their qualifications and contributions. The personal stakes involved in this decision extended beyond individual career advancement to encompass broader questions about gender equality, organizational justice, and her responsibility to use her position and capabilities to create positive change for others who had faced similar discrimination. The practical considerations surrounding her response options required careful analysis of available resources, potential allies, and realistic timelines for achieving meaningful organizational change through different strategic approaches. Alexandra spent considerable time evaluating her professional networks, financial resources, legal options, and alternative career opportunities that could provide security during what might become an extended period of organizational conflict and transition. Her support system analysis revealed both encouraging assets and concerning limitations that would influence the feasibility and effectiveness of different response strategies. Several colleagues had expressed private concerns about organizational culture and advancement opportunities for women, suggesting potential allies for collaborative approaches to institutional change. However, most of these individuals occupied positions that provided limited influence over strategic decisions and could face significant career risks if they supported comprehensive reform initiatives publicly. The board meeting had revealed that at least some board members, particularly Margaret Chen, possessed genuine commitment to diversity and inclusion that could provide high-level support for appropriate reform initiatives. However, Alexandra recognized that board support would depend on presenting compelling business cases for organizational change, rather than simply documenting discrimination incidents or appealing to moral principles that might not translate into strategic action. Her financial analysis revealed sufficient resources to sustain extended periods of career uncertainty if necessary, particularly given her graduate education, professional experience, and industry reputation that could facilitate transition to alternative opportunities if her current position became untenable. This financial security provided important flexibility for pursuing response strategies that might involve significant personal risk but offered greater potential for meaningful organizational change. The legal consultation process that Alexandra initiated during the days following the board meeting provided crucial insights into both the strength of her discrimination case and the complex strategic considerations involved in various response approaches. Employment attorneys confirmed that David's statements constituted clear evidence of intentional discrimination that violated federal and state anti-discrimination laws, creating strong foundation for legal action if she chose to pursue that option. However, legal experts also emphasized the extensive preparation, documentation, and strategic planning that would be required for successful litigation or regulatory complaints that could withstand aggressive defense strategies and potential counterclaims. The legal process would likely extend over multiple years, generate significant costs despite contingency fee arrangements, and create ongoing stress and uncertainty that could affect both her professional effectiveness and personal well-being. The attorney consultations also revealed alternative legal strategies that could provide protection and leverage without requiring immediate formal complaints or litigation. Comprehensive documentation of discriminatory incidents, strategic communication with human resources departments, and careful coordination with other affected employees could create conditions where organizations might choose to implement voluntary reforms rather than face expensive and reputation-damaging legal proceedings. Alexandra's conversations with trusted mentors and advisors outside Global Dynamics provided additional perspectives on the strategic implications of her response options and the potential long-term consequences of different approaches. These discussions revealed both encouraging support for her leadership capabilities and sobering warnings about the career risks associated with challenging entrenched organizational power structures, particularly in industries where informal networks and reputation management remained crucial for advancement opportunities. The mentor feedback emphasized the importance of careful strategic planning, comprehensive preparation, and realistic assessment of potential outcomes before committing to any specific response approach. Several advisors recommended focusing on building documented evidence of her leadership effectiveness and business impact, while simultaneously developing alternative career opportunities that could provide security and advancement possibilities independent of her current organizational constraints. The internal struggle that characterized this decision-making process reflected the broader challenges faced by talented women navigating corporate environments where systematic discrimination coexisted with official policies promoting equality and inclusion. Alexandra recognized that her individual response to this catalyst moment would establish precedents and expectations that could influence how similar situations were addressed throughout the organization and potentially across the broader technology consulting industry. The weight of this responsibility created additional pressure beyond her personal career considerations, as she understood that effective response to David's discriminatory statements could create positive change for numerous other women, while ineffective handling of this opportunity might reinforce existing barriers and discourage future challenges to discriminatory practices. The moral dimensions of her decision-making process emphasized both the obligation to address systematic injustice and the practical necessity of choosing strategies that could realistically achieve meaningful change rather than simply providing emotional satisfaction through confrontational approaches that might ultimately prove counterproductive. The recognition that this catalyst moment represented her most significant opportunity to demonstrate transformational leadership capabilities gradually emerged as the decisive factor in Alexandra's strategic analysis. Her response to this crisis situation would provide definitive evidence of her ability to handle complex challenges, navigate difficult interpersonal dynamics, and develop strategic solutions that could address systematic problems while advancing organizational effectiveness and business performance. This understanding began to shift her internal struggle from defensive reactions to discriminatory treatment toward proactive planning for organizational transformation that could demonstrate women's exceptional capabilities for executive leadership, while creating conditions where future talented professionals could advance based on merit rather than gender-based stereotypes and biases. The process of identifying and cultivating strategic alliances required Alexandra Martinez to reassess her professional relationships with unprecedented clarity and purpose. The catalyst moment from the board meeting had fundamentally altered her understanding of the organizational dynamics at Global Dynamics Corporation, necessitating a comprehensive evaluation of which colleagues, mentors, and industry contacts could provide meaningful support for the transformational initiatives she was beginning to contemplate. This analysis demanded careful assessment of individual motivations, organizational positions, potential risks, and strategic value that each relationship could contribute to efforts aimed at addressing systematic gender discrimination while demonstrating alternative approaches to corporate leadership. Margaret Chen emerged as the most significant potential ally within the board structure, given her demonstrated commitment to diversity and inclusion, evidenced by her direct challenge to David Chen's discriminatory statements during the quarterly meeting. As the founder and former chief executive officer of Chen Strategic Consulting, Margaret possessed extensive experience navigating gender bias in male-dominated industries, along with the credibility and influence necessary to advocate effectively for organizational change at the highest levels of corporate governance. Her board position provided access to strategic decision-making processes that could facilitate rapid implementation of policy changes and cultural initiatives designed to address systematic barriers to advancement for women and other underrepresented groups. Alexandra's initial approach to developing this relationship required delicate balance between professional respect for Margaret's senior position and genuine collaboration around shared concerns about organizational culture and advancement opportunities. The conversation that emerged from Alexandra's carefully crafted outreach revealed that Margaret had been documenting patterns of gender bias at Global Dynamics for several months, recognizing that David's public statements represented the explicit articulation of attitudes that had been influencing organizational decisions through more subtle mechanisms for years. Margaret's perspective on strategic change emphasized the importance of building comprehensive business cases that demonstrated how inclusive leadership practices could enhance organizational performance, client satisfaction, and competitive positioning, rather than simply addressing moral or legal obligations related to workplace equality. Her experience implementing diversity initiatives across multiple organizations had taught her that sustainable change required integration with business strategy and measurable outcomes that could demonstrate return on investment for stakeholders who might otherwise view such initiatives as peripheral to core organizational objectives. The alliance that developed between Alexandra and Margaret created a powerful foundation for addressing systematic problems at Global Dynamics through coordinated action that leveraged both operational expertise and governance authority. Margaret's board position enabled her to advocate for policy changes and executive accountability measures, while Alexandra's detailed knowledge of organizational culture and operational processes provided practical insights necessary for designing effective implementation strategies. Jennifer Walsh, the Vice President of Human Resources, represented another crucial ally whose support would be essential for implementing comprehensive organizational changes that addressed systematic discrimination while creating development opportunities for talented women throughout the company. Jennifer's initial response to confidential discussions about the board meeting incident revealed both genuine concern about legal liability and authentic commitment to creating more equitable advancement processes that could enhance talent retention and organizational effectiveness. The relationship between Alexandra and Jennifer evolved through a series of strategic conversations that explored various approaches to addressing gender bias, while maintaining organizational stability and employee confidence in leadership integrity. Jennifer's expertise in employment law, organizational development, and change management provided essential technical knowledge for designing initiatives that could withstand legal scrutiny while generating meaningful improvements in workplace culture and advancement opportunities. Jennifer's perspective on organizational change emphasized the necessity of comprehensive documentation, systematic policy development, and careful implementation planning that could address existing problems while preventing future incidents of discrimination or retaliation. Her experience managing sensitive personnel issues had taught her that successful diversity initiatives required executive support, adequate resources, clear accountability mechanisms, and ongoing measurement systems that could demonstrate progress and identify areas requiring additional attention or adjustment. The collaboration between Alexandra and Jennifer focused on developing strategic recommendations for board consideration that would address immediate concerns about discriminatory practices while establishing long-term systems for promoting inclusive leadership development and equitable advancement opportunities. This work required extensive research into industry best practices, legal requirements, and organizational change methodologies that could be adapted to Global Dynamics' specific culture and operational requirements. Robert Kim, a senior director in the Strategy and Operations Division, emerged as an unexpected but valuable ally, whose support reflected growing recognition among male colleagues that gender discrimination represented both ethical problems and business inefficiencies that undermined organizational performance. Robert's initial skepticism about diversity initiatives had been transformed through observations of how talented women were being systematically underutilized, despite their demonstrated capabilities and potential contributions to strategic objectives. The relationship between Alexandra and Robert developed through collaborative work on client engagements, where her analytical skills and strategic insights had consistently enhanced project outcomes and client satisfaction. Robert's willingness to advocate for Alexandra's advancement reflected both personal respect for her capabilities and professional recognition that the organization was failing to capitalize on exceptional talent due to biased decision-making processes that prioritized demographic characteristics over demonstrated competence and potential. Robert's support proved particularly valuable because his advocacy came from a senior male colleague whose perspectives would be received differently by traditional organizational leaders, who might dismiss concerns raised by women as self-interested complaints rather than objective assessments of systematic problems. His willingness to document instances of gender bias and advocate for policy changes represented the type of allyship that research demonstrated was essential for creating sustainable organizational change around diversity and inclusion issues. The strategic alliance with Robert also provided Alexandra with insights into informal power networks and decision-making processes that operated outside official organizational structures, but significantly influenced advancement opportunities and resource allocation throughout the company. Robert's participation in these informal networks enabled him to advocate for Alexandra's recognition and advancement, while providing intelligence about resistance or support for diversity initiatives among other senior male colleagues. Sarah Nakamura, a talented project manager who had experienced similar patterns of discrimination and limited advancement opportunities despite exceptional performance, represented the type of coalition building that would be necessary for creating systematic organizational change, rather than simply addressing individual cases of bias or discrimination. Sarah's experiences paralleled Alexandra's observations about subtle but persistent barriers that prevented women from accessing leadership opportunities commensurate with their qualifications and contributions. The relationship between Alexandra and Sarah evolved from shared recognition of common challenges to strategic collaboration, aimed at documenting patterns of discrimination and developing recommendations for organizational changes that could benefit numerous talented women throughout Global Dynamics. Sarah's detailed observations of meeting dynamics, project assignment processes, and performance evaluation patterns provided additional evidence of systematic bias, while her client relationship management successes demonstrated women's capabilities for handling complex stakeholder relationships and strategic challenges. Sarah's perspective on organizational change emphasized the importance of creating support networks among women at different career levels who could share experiences, provide mutual mentorship, and advocate collectively for policy changes that addressed systematic barriers, rather than simply seeking individual accommodations or exceptions. Her vision for sustainable change included formal mentorship programs, leadership development initiatives, and advancement process modifications that could create equitable opportunities for future generations of talented women. The coalition that developed among Alexandra, Sarah, and several other professional women at Global Dynamics created a powerful foundation for advocating comprehensive organizational changes, while providing mutual support during what could become a challenging period of institutional transformation. This network enabled them to document patterns of discrimination more comprehensively, develop strategic recommendations collaboratively, and distribute the risks associated with challenging entrenched organizational practices among multiple participants rather than placing individual responsibility on any single person. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Alexandra's former graduate school advisor and current dean at the University of Washington Business School, provided crucial external perspective and strategic guidance that complemented the internal support network developing at Global Dynamics. Elena's academic expertise in organizational behavior and corporate governance, combined with her extensive consulting experience with major corporations, enabled her to offer sophisticated analysis of change strategies and potential consequences that Alexandra might not anticipate based solely on her operational experience. The mentoring relationship between Alexandra and Elena had developed over several years through ongoing professional development activities and industry networking events that had maintained their connection despite Alexandra's transition from academic to corporate environments. Elena's perspective on Alexandra's career development had consistently emphasized the importance of strategic thinking, relationship building, and systematic documentation of achievements and obstacles that could inform future advancement strategies. Elena's response to confidential discussions about the board meeting incident reflected both outrage at the discriminatory attitudes Alexandra had witnessed and strategic thinking about how this catalyst moment could be leveraged to create meaningful organizational change, while advancing Alexandra's career objectives. Her experience advising other professional women who had faced similar challenges provided valuable insights into effective strategies for addressing gender bias while minimizing personal and professional risks. The strategic guidance that Elena provided emphasized the importance of comprehensive preparation, clear documentation, and systematic relationship building that could support whatever response strategy Alexandra ultimately chose to pursue. Elena's network of contacts in academia, consulting, and corporate leadership could provide additional resources and alternative opportunities if Alexandra's efforts to create change at Global Dynamics generated negative consequences or proved insufficient for achieving her professional objectives. James Morrison, a senior partner at a prominent employment law firm specializing in workplace discrimination cases, provided essential legal perspective that informed Alexandra's understanding of her rights, options, and the potential consequences of different strategic approaches to addressing the systematic bias she had documented. James's expertise in corporate discrimination cases enabled him to evaluate the strength of Alexandra's evidence while providing realistic assessment of various legal and non-legal strategies for achieving organizational change. The legal consultation process revealed that Alexandra possessed compelling evidence of intentional discrimination that could support successful litigation if she chose to pursue that option. However, James's experience with similar cases also provided sobering insights into the emotional, financial, and professional costs associated with legal action, along with realistic timelines and potential outcomes that could result from different strategic approaches. James's strategic advice emphasized the value of comprehensive documentation, careful coordination with other affected employees, and systematic efforts to address problems through internal channels before pursuing external legal remedies. His experience had demonstrated that organizations often preferred to implement voluntary changes rather than face expensive litigation and negative publicity, particularly when presented with clear evidence of systematic problems and practical recommendations for addressing them effectively. The support system that Alexandra assembled through these strategic relationships provided both emotional sustenance and practical resources necessary for pursuing transformational change at Global Dynamics Corporation. The diversity of perspectives, expertise, and organizational positions represented in this network created multiple pathways for addressing systematic gender discrimination, while demonstrating alternative approaches to corporate leadership that could enhance organizational performance and competitive positioning. This comprehensive support system transformed Alexandra's individual response to discrimination into a collaborative effort that could leverage collective expertise, distribute risks appropriately, and create sustainable organizational changes that would benefit numerous talented professionals who deserved advancement opportunities based on merit rather than demographic characteristics or conformity to traditional masculine leadership behaviors and expectations. Alexandra Martinez began her transformation campaign with a comprehensive strategic plan that addressed both immediate concerns about documented discrimination and long-term objectives for organizational culture change at Global Dynamics Corporation. The approach she developed through extensive consultation with her support network emphasized systematic documentation, relationship building, and gradual implementation of initiatives that could demonstrate the business value of inclusive leadership while building momentum for more comprehensive reforms. This methodical strategy reflected her analytical background and recognition that sustainable organizational change required careful preparation, stakeholder engagement, and measurable outcomes that could withstand scrutiny from skeptical leaders and potential legal challenges. The initial phase of her action plan focused on building an irrefutable foundation of evidence that documented patterns of gender discrimination while simultaneously demonstrating her own leadership capabilities through exceptional performance on high-visibility projects. Alexandra understood that her credibility and influence would be essential for advancing diversity initiatives, requiring her to excel in traditional business metrics while advocating for progressive organizational changes that some colleagues might view as peripheral to core business objectives. Her first strategic initiative involved requesting formal documentation of the board meeting incident through official corporate channels, working with Jennifer Walsh to ensure that David Chen's discriminatory statements were recorded accurately in meeting minutes and human resources files. This documentation process required careful navigation of organizational protocols while ensuring that the evidence would be preserved and accessible for future reference, regardless of potential personnel changes or policy modifications that might occur as leadership became aware of the legal and reputational risks associated with documented discrimination. The formal documentation request generated immediate concern among senior leaders who recognized the potential liability associated with explicit evidence of intentional discrimination by a director-level executive. Robert Steinberg convened emergency consultations with legal counsel and human resources leadership to assess the scope of potential problems and develop strategies for addressing documented bias while minimizing organizational exposure to litigation and regulatory scrutiny. These emergency consultations revealed that Alexandra's systematic approach to documenting discrimination had created conditions where Global Dynamics faced significant legal and reputational risks that could not be dismissed or minimized through traditional conflict resolution processes. The board meeting statements represented unambiguous evidence of intentional discrimination that violated federal employment laws and created liability for the organization regardless of whether Alexandra pursued individual legal action or formal complaints with regulatory agencies. The legal analysis also revealed that Alexandra's documentation efforts had positioned her as a protected whistleblower under various employment statutes, making any retaliation or negative employment actions potentially illegal and subject to additional penalties and damages. This legal protection provided Alexandra with significant leverage for advocating organizational changes, while reducing the personal and professional risks associated with challenging established power structures and discriminatory practices. Alexandra's second strategic initiative focused on developing comprehensive recommendations for organizational policy changes that could address systematic gender bias while enhancing business performance through improved talent utilization and inclusive leadership development. Working collaboratively with Margaret Chen and Jennifer Walsh, she prepared detailed proposals that addressed recruitment practices, advancement criteria, performance evaluation systems, and leadership development programs that research demonstrated could improve organizational effectiveness while creating equitable opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than demographic characteristics. The policy recommendations emphasized business justifications for diversity initiatives, including research demonstrating that inclusive organizations achieved superior financial performance, enhanced innovation capabilities, improved client satisfaction, and reduced turnover among high-performing employees. These business cases were designed to appeal to stakeholders who might be skeptical of diversity efforts based solely on moral or legal arguments, providing compelling evidence that inclusive practices represented strategic investments rather than compliance obligations or political correctness initiatives. The development of these policy recommendations required extensive research into industry best practices, legal requirements, and organizational change methodologies that could be adapted to Global Dynamics' specific operational needs and cultural characteristics. Alexandra coordinated this research effort while maintaining her regular project responsibilities, demonstrating the time management and multitasking capabilities that would be essential for executive leadership roles. The comprehensive nature of Alexandra's policy recommendations impressed board members and senior leaders, who had expected narrow complaints about individual treatment, rather than sophisticated strategic proposals for organizational improvement. The quality of her analysis and the practicality of her suggestions provided compelling evidence of her strategic thinking capabilities while addressing concerns about women's fitness for executive leadership that David Chen had articulated during the board meeting. However, the initial response to Alexandra's policy recommendations also revealed significant organizational resistance from middle management and some senior leaders who perceived diversity initiatives as threats to existing advancement opportunities and established cultural norms. This resistance manifested through skeptical questioning of research citations, concerns about implementation costs, and warnings about potential negative consequences of rapid organizational change that could compromise operational efficiency or client relationships. David Chen emerged as the primary source of organized resistance to Alexandra's initiatives, leveraging his position as Director of Operations to influence other senior leaders and create obstacles to policy implementation. His response to the documented discrimination incident involved defensive justifications of his statements, claims that his comments had been misinterpreted or taken out of context, and strategic efforts to undermine Alexandra's credibility through questioning her motives and qualifications for advocating organizational changes. The resistance campaign that David orchestrated included subtle retaliation through project assignment modifications, exclusion from strategic planning discussions, and systematic questioning of Alexandra's recommendations and analyses during meetings and client presentations. These tactics were designed to compromise her professional effectiveness while maintaining plausible deniability about retaliatory intent, reflecting sophisticated understanding of how to implement discrimination while avoiding obvious legal violations. David's resistance strategy also involved building coalitions among other senior leaders, who shared concerns about diversity initiatives, or perceived Alexandra's advocacy as threatening to their own positions and advancement opportunities. These informal alliances created additional obstacles to policy implementation, while generating organizational tension that complicated Alexandra's efforts to build consensus around recommended changes. The systematic nature of this resistance provided Alexandra with additional evidence of retaliatory behavior that strengthened her legal position, while demonstrating the entrenched nature of discriminatory attitudes throughout the organization. Working with James Morrison, she documented each instance of apparent retaliation while maintaining exceptional performance standards that made it difficult for David and his allies to justify negative treatment through legitimate business considerations. Alexandra's third strategic initiative focused on building external visibility and industry recognition that could enhance her professional reputation, while creating additional pressure for Global Dynamics to address documented discrimination through positive organizational changes rather than defensive legal strategies. This approach involved seeking speaking opportunities at industry conferences, publishing articles about inclusive leadership practices, and participating in professional organizations that promoted diversity and inclusion in corporate environments. The external visibility strategy served multiple purposes, including demonstration of thought leadership capabilities, creation of alternative career opportunities that could provide security during organizational conflict, and generation of positive public attention that could influence Global Dynamics' reputation and stakeholder relationships. Industry recognition of Alexandra's expertise and leadership potential provided compelling counter-evidence to claims about women's unsuitability for executive positions, while creating expectations that the organization should utilize her talents appropriately. The positive response to Alexandra's external visibility efforts included invitations to serve on industry advisory committees, requests for consultation on diversity initiatives at other organizations, and recognition from professional associations that enhanced her credibility and influence within the technology consulting sector. These external achievements provided objective validation of her leadership capabilities, while creating networking opportunities that could support her career advancement regardless of outcomes at Global Dynamics. However, the external visibility strategy also generated additional resistance from David Chen and other skeptical colleagues who perceived her growing industry recognition as evidence of disloyalty to the organization or inappropriate self-promotion that compromised her effectiveness as a team member. This criticism reflected common double standards that penalized women for self-advocacy behaviors that were praised when exhibited by male colleagues, providing further evidence of systematic gender bias in organizational culture and performance evaluation processes. Alexandra's fourth strategic initiative involved implementing informal mentorship and support programs for other women at Global Dynamics who had experienced similar barriers to advancement or discrimination in their professional development. These initiatives were designed to create collective advocacy capabilities while providing mutual support during what could become challenging periods of organizational transition and potential retaliation from resistant leaders. The informal support network that Alexandra helped establish included regular meetings, professional development workshops, and collaborative advocacy efforts that strengthened individual participants while building organizational pressure for systematic policy changes. These activities demonstrated her commitment to collective advancement rather than individual benefit, addressing potential criticisms that her advocacy was motivated by personal grievances rather than genuine concern for organizational improvement. The success of these informal programs attracted attention from senior leaders who recognized both the positive impact on employee engagement and the implicit criticism of existing organizational culture that made such support networks necessary. Some leaders expressed appreciation for Alexandra's initiative in addressing employee development needs, while others viewed these activities as evidence of organizational disloyalty or attempts to create divisive coalitions that could compromise operational effectiveness. The resistance to Alexandra's mentorship initiatives included subtle pressure to discontinue activities that might be perceived as inappropriate use of company resources or time, along with concerns that such programs could create legal liability if they excluded male employees or appeared to promote gender-based preferences in advancement or development opportunities. These concerns reflected common misconceptions about diversity programs while revealing the defensive mindset that characterized organizational responses to evidence of systematic discrimination. Alexandra's response to this resistance involved working with Jennifer Walsh to develop formal proposals for inclusive mentorship programs that would benefit all employees, while addressing documented gaps in leadership development and advancement support for underrepresented groups. This approach transformed informal initiatives into official organizational programs that could receive appropriate resources and administrative support while maintaining legal compliance and broad employee participation. The strategic approach that Alexandra employed during these initial action phases reflected sophisticated understanding of organizational change processes and the importance of building sustainable momentum through systematic relationship building, evidence development, and incremental policy implementation. Her efforts demonstrated executive leadership capabilities while creating conditions where global dynamics faced increasing pressure to address documented discrimination through positive organizational changes, rather than defensive resistance or legal maneuvering. The resistance that her initiatives encountered provided additional evidence of the systematic nature of gender bias at Global Dynamics, while revealing the entrenched interests that benefited from existing discriminatory practices. This resistance also demonstrated the courage and persistence that would be required for achieving meaningful organizational change in environments where progressive leadership initiatives faced skepticism and active opposition from traditional power structures. The foundation that Alexandra established through these initial actions created multiple pathways for advancing her strategic objectives while providing legal protection, external validation, and organizational support that would be essential for navigating the complex challenges associated with transforming corporate culture and advancing to senior leadership positions, where she could implement comprehensive changes that would benefit all talented employees, regardless of gender or other demographic characteristics. The systematic resistance that Alexandra Martinez encountered during her initial transformation efforts revealed the sophisticated leadership competencies that would be required for achieving sustainable organizational change while advancing to executive positions where she could implement comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiatives. Her response to these challenges necessitated accelerated development of strategic capabilities that extended far beyond her technical expertise in financial analysis and project management, encompassing advanced skills in organizational psychology, change management, stakeholder relationship building, and crisis leadership that distinguished exceptional executives from competent managers. The first critical competency that Alexandra needed to master involved sophisticated political acumen that could navigate complex organizational dynamics while maintaining ethical integrity and strategic focus on long-term objectives. The resistance campaign orchestrated by David Chen required her to understand informal power networks, anticipate strategic responses from opponents, and develop countermeasures that could neutralize opposition while building broader support for diversity initiatives among stakeholders who might initially view such efforts as peripheral to core business objectives. Her approach to developing political competency involved systematic observation of organizational decision-making processes, analysis of influence patterns among senior leaders, and strategic relationship building with key stakeholders who possessed authority to support or obstruct policy implementation. Alexandra recognized that effective political navigation required understanding the underlying interests and concerns that motivated different organizational actors, enabling her to frame diversity initiatives in terms that aligned with their priorities and values, rather than simply appealing to abstract principles of fairness or legal compliance. The practical application of these political insights involved careful timing of strategic communications, thoughtful selection of allies for specific initiatives, and sophisticated messaging that emphasized business benefits rather than moral imperatives when advocating for organizational changes. Alexandra learned to present diversity recommendations as strategic investments that could enhance competitive positioning, improve talent retention, and increase client satisfaction rather than compliance obligations that imposed costs without generating measurable returns. This political skill development required Alexandra to balance authenticity with strategic communication, maintaining her personal values and commitment to systemic change, while adapting her approach to resonate with audiences who possessed different perspectives and priorities. The competency involved learning to identify common ground with potential allies, address legitimate concerns raised by skeptical stakeholders, and maintain productive relationships even with individuals who opposed specific initiatives or questioned their necessity. The second essential competency involved mastering advanced communication strategies that could influence diverse audiences while maintaining credibility and building trust across organizational hierarchies. The resistance to her initiatives required Alexandra to communicate effectively with board members, senior executives, middle managers, and individual contributors who possessed varying levels of understanding about diversity issues and different perspectives on the relationship between inclusive practices and business performance. Her communication skill development emphasized the importance of audience analysis, message customization, and strategic use of data and narrative elements that could make complex concepts accessible and compelling to listeners with different educational backgrounds, professional experiences, and personal perspectives on organizational change. Alexandra learned to adapt her communication style and content based on whether she was addressing analytical executives who preferred quantitative evidence, relationship-oriented managers who responded to personal stories, or skeptical colleagues who required comprehensive explanations of implementation processes and potential outcomes. The practical application of these communication competencies involved developing multiple versions of diversity business cases that emphasized different benefits and addressed various concerns depending on audience characteristics and situational contexts. Alexandra became proficient at presenting financial arguments to executives focused on return on investment, operational benefits to managers concerned about team effectiveness, and strategic advantages to board members evaluating competitive positioning and long-term organizational sustainability. This communication skill development also required Alexandra to master difficult conversation management, enabling her to address resistance and criticism constructively while maintaining professional relationships and advancing strategic objectives. She learned to acknowledge legitimate concerns, provide factual responses to misconceptions, and redirect conversations toward collaborative problem-solving rather than defensive justifications or personal attacks that could compromise her credibility and influence. The third critical competency involved developing sophisticated change management expertise that could guide complex organizational transformations while maintaining operational effectiveness and employee engagement throughout transition periods. The systematic nature of gender bias at Global Dynamics required comprehensive cultural changes that extended far beyond policy modifications to encompass fundamental shifts in leadership behaviors, evaluation criteria, and organizational practices that had been institutionalized over decades of traditional management approaches. Her change management skill development involved studying organizational psychology research, consulting with external experts, and analyzing case studies of successful diversity transformations at comparable companies to identify effective strategies and potential obstacles that could be anticipated and addressed proactively. Alexandra learned to design change initiatives that balanced the urgency of addressing documented discrimination with the practical reality that sustainable cultural transformation required time, resources, and systematic reinforcement of new behaviors and expectations. The practical application of change management competencies involved developing comprehensive implementation plans that included stakeholder engagement strategies, communication timelines, training program designs, and measurement systems that could track progress while identifying areas requiring additional attention or resource allocation. Alexandra became proficient at managing the emotional dimensions of organizational change, recognizing that resistance often reflected fear and uncertainty rather than fundamental opposition to diversity principles. This change management expertise enabled Alexandra to design initiatives that addressed psychological barriers to change, while providing clear pathways for individual adaptation and growth. She learned to create safe spaces for honest discussions about diversity challenges, provide training and support for leaders who wanted to improve their inclusive management practices, and establish accountability systems that encouraged behavioral change through positive reinforcement rather than punitive measures that could generate defensive responses. The fourth essential competency involved mastering crisis leadership capabilities that could maintain organizational stability and stakeholder confidence during periods of conflict and uncertainty associated with challenging entrenched discriminatory practices. The potential for legal action, regulatory scrutiny, and negative publicity required Alexandra to develop skills in crisis communication, reputation management, and strategic decision-making under pressure that could protect organizational interests while advancing diversity objectives. Her crisis leadership development involved studying how other organizations had successfully navigated discrimination incidents, working with legal and communications experts to understand potential scenarios and appropriate responses, and developing contingency plans that could address various outcomes while maintaining strategic focus on long-term objectives. Alexandra learned to balance transparency with confidentiality requirements, stakeholder communication with legal considerations, and immediate crisis response with sustained relationship building that could support organizational recovery and improvement. The practical application of crisis leadership competencies involved developing communication strategies that could address negative publicity constructively, stakeholder relationship management approaches that could maintain confidence during controversial periods, and decision-making frameworks that could balance competing priorities while maintaining ethical integrity and strategic focus. Alexandra became proficient at managing media relationships, coordinating with legal counsel, and maintaining internal communication that could prevent rumors and speculation from undermining organizational effectiveness. This crisis leadership skill development also prepared Alexandra to handle personal attacks and professional retaliation that might result from challenging powerful organizational actors who benefited from existing discriminatory practices. She learned to maintain emotional equilibrium during stressful periods, seek appropriate support from her alliance network, and continue performing at exceptional levels despite external pressures that could compromise focus and effectiveness. The fifth critical competency involved developing advanced strategic planning capabilities that could integrate diversity and inclusion objectives with broader business strategy, while ensuring that organizational changes supported, rather than compromised, competitive positioning and financial performance. The complexity of transforming organizational culture while maintaining operational excellence required sophisticated analytical skills and systems thinking that could identify synergies between inclusive practices and business objectives. Her strategic planning skill development involved studying the relationship between diversity initiatives and business outcomes, analyzing successful integration approaches used by industry leaders, and developing frameworks for measuring return on investment from inclusion programs that could demonstrate value to skeptical stakeholders. Alexandra learned to design diversity strategies that reinforced rather than competed with other organizational priorities, creating comprehensive approaches that addressed multiple business challenges simultaneously. The practical application of strategic planning competencies involved developing long-term roadmaps for cultural transformation that included specific milestones, resource requirements, and success metrics that could guide implementation while providing accountability mechanisms for organizational leaders. Alexandra became proficient at identifying potential synergies between diversity initiatives and other strategic priorities, designing integrated approaches that could achieve multiple objectives efficiently. This strategic planning expertise enabled Alexandra to position diversity and inclusion as essential components of organizational strategy rather than separate initiatives that competed for resources and attention. She learned to demonstrate how inclusive practices could enhance innovation capabilities, improve client relationships, and strengthen competitive positioning, while addressing documented discrimination and creating equitable advancement opportunities. The competency development process that Alexandra undertook during this period required exceptional time management and personal discipline, as she maintained superior performance in her regular responsibilities while acquiring advanced leadership skills through formal education, professional development programs, mentorship relationships, and practical application in challenging organizational situations. This demonstration of learning agility and performance under pressure provided compelling evidence of her executive potential while building the capabilities necessary for success in senior leadership roles. The systematic approach that Alexandra employed for skill development reflected her analytical background and recognition that executive competency required continuous learning and adaptation rather than reliance on existing expertise alone. She established personal development plans, sought feedback from trusted advisors, and regularly assessed her progress against objective criteria that could guide future learning priorities and strategic decisions. The integration of these diverse competencies created a comprehensive leadership capability that distinguished Alexandra from other talented professionals who possessed technical expertise but lacked the sophisticated skills necessary for navigating complex organizational challenges while implementing transformational change initiatives. Her competency development demonstrated the learning agility and strategic thinking that would be essential for executive success while providing concrete evidence that women could excel in leadership roles that required decisive action, strategic vision, and sophisticated stakeholder management under challenging circumstances. This comprehensive skill development process positioned Alexandra to respond effectively to the escalating challenges and opportunities that would emerge as her transformation campaign gained momentum and attracted attention from industry leaders, regulatory agencies, and other stakeholders who possessed the authority to influence both her individual career trajectory and broader organizational changes at Global Dynamics Corporation. The comprehensive transformation strategy that Alexandra Martinez had carefully constructed over several months faced its most severe test when a coordinated campaign of professional sabotage threatened to dismantle the strategic alliances that formed the foundation of her organizational change initiatives. The crisis emerged from a calculated series of actions designed to isolate her from key supporters while undermining her credibility and influence within Global Dynamics Corporation. This systematic assault on her professional relationships required immediate application of the crisis leadership competencies she had been developing while testing her resilience and strategic thinking under extraordinary pressure. The catalyst for this major setback occurred during the preparation phase for a critical client presentation that represented Global Dynamics' largest potential contract of the fiscal year. The Technology Transformation Initiative for Pacific Industries encompassed a 3-year, $45 million engagement that would establish Global Dynamics as the premier consulting partner for one of the region's most influential corporations. Alexandra had been designated as the lead strategic analyst for this engagement, responsible for developing comprehensive recommendations that would guide Pacific Industries through complex organizational restructuring while implementing advanced technology solutions that could enhance operational efficiency and competitive positioning. The significance of this client engagement extended beyond its financial value to encompass strategic importance for Global Dynamics' market positioning and future growth trajectory. Success with Pacific Industries would establish precedents for similar engagements with other major corporations, while demonstrating the firm's capabilities for managing complex transformation projects that required integration of technology implementation with organizational change management. The contract represented an opportunity for Global Dynamics to differentiate itself from competitors through innovative approaches that combined technical expertise with sophisticated understanding of human factors and organizational effectiveness. Alexandra's selection for this leadership role had reflected recognition of her analytical capabilities and strategic thinking skills, along with acknowledgement that her inclusive management approach could enhance client relationships and project outcomes. The engagement provided an ideal platform for demonstrating the business value of diverse leadership, while building industry visibility that could support her career advancement and diversity advocacy objectives. The high-profile nature of the project meant that exceptional performance could significantly enhance her professional reputation and influence within the organization. However, David Chen recognized that Alexandra's success on this engagement could provide compelling evidence that women possessed the strategic thinking and client relationship management capabilities he had publicly claimed they lacked. Her potential success represented a direct challenge to his credibility and authority, while creating organizational pressure for diversity initiatives that could threaten his position and influence. This strategic threat motivated him to orchestrate comprehensive sabotage efforts designed to ensure her failure while maintaining plausible deniability about retaliatory intent. The sabotage campaign began with systematic exclusion of Alexandra from critical planning meetings and strategic discussions that were essential for developing comprehensive client recommendations. David utilized his authority as Director of Operations to schedule these meetings during times when Alexandra had conflicting obligations, or to relocate them to venues where her participation would be logistically difficult. These exclusions were presented as scheduling conflicts or communication errors, rather than deliberate attempts to limit her access to information and collaborative opportunities. The impact of these exclusions became apparent when Alexandra discovered that significant decisions had been made about project scope, resource allocation, and implementation timelines without her input or knowledge. The modifications to original project parameters affected her analytical work, while creating inconsistencies in strategic recommendations that could compromise client confidence and project outcomes. Her attempts to address these issues through normal organizational channels were met with claims that she had been informed about changes, or that her input was not required for certain decisions. The second component of the sabotage campaign involved strategic misinformation that was designed to compromise Alexandra's analytical work while creating the appearance of incompetence or inadequate preparation. Key data sources were modified or withheld. Project requirements were changed without notification, and conflicting guidance was provided by different team members about client preferences and priorities. These information manipulation tactics were subtle enough to avoid obvious detection, while creating conditions where Alexandra's recommendations would appear flawed or insufficient during client presentations. The sophisticated nature of this misinformation campaign required careful coordination among multiple team members who were either active participants in the sabotage effort or unwitting contributors who had been provided with inaccurate information about project requirements and client expectations. David Chen's position enabled him to control information flow and coordinate these efforts while maintaining the appearance of normal project management activities. The third element of the sabotage strategy focused on undermining Alexandra's relationships with key stakeholders who had previously provided support for her diversity initiatives and professional advancement. David initiated confidential conversations with board members, senior executives, and client representatives that questioned Alexandra's commitment to team collaboration, raised concerns about her focus on external advocacy activities, and suggested that her diversity initiatives reflected personal grievances rather than legitimate business concerns. These relationship sabotage efforts were particularly damaging because they exploited common stereotypes about women who advocated for workplace equality, portraying Alexandra as divisive, self-interested, or insufficiently focused on client service and organizational objectives. The conversations were structured to plant seeds of doubt about her professional judgment and team leadership capabilities, while appearing to express legitimate concerns about project management and organizational effectiveness. The cumulative impact of these sabotage efforts created a crisis situation where Alexandra faced potential failure on the most important project of her career, while simultaneously losing support from strategic allies who had been essential for advancing her diversity initiatives. The Pacific Industries engagement appeared increasingly likely to fail due to information gaps, resource constraints, and coordination problems that had been artificially created through systematic interference with normal project management processes. The immediate emotional impact of recognizing the scope and sophistication of this sabotage campaign was devastating for Alexandra, who experienced profound feelings of betrayal, frustration, and overwhelming pressure as she realized that her professional reputation and future career prospects were under coordinated attack. The recognition that colleagues were actively working to ensure her failure challenged her fundamental assumptions about professional relationships and organizational fairness, while creating intense psychological stress that threatened to compromise her performance and decision-making capabilities. The strategic implications of this crisis extended beyond the immediate Pacific Industries engagement to encompass broader questions about her ability to achieve meaningful organizational change in an environment where powerful opponents were willing to engage in systematic professional sabotage. The sophisticated nature of the campaign suggested that future diversity initiatives would face similar resistance, while her credibility and influence could be permanently damaged if she failed to respond effectively to current challenges. The legal dimensions of the sabotage campaign provided potential grounds for additional discrimination and retaliation claims. But pursuing legal remedies would require comprehensive documentation and could create extended conflict that might ultimately prove more damaging to her career prospects than current challenges. The timing of the sabotage during a critical client engagement also meant that legal action could compromise project outcomes and create additional professional complications regardless of ultimate legal success. Alexandra's response to this crisis situation required immediate application of the crisis leadership competencies she had been developing, while simultaneously implementing damage control strategies that could salvage the Pacific Industries engagement and preserve her professional relationships. The challenge demanded exceptional strategic thinking under pressure, along with emotional resilience that could maintain focus and effectiveness despite systematic attempts to undermine her success. Her initial crisis response involved systematic analysis of the sabotage campaign to identify specific tactics being employed, key participants in the effort, and potential countermeasures that could neutralize interference while advancing project objectives. This analysis required careful documentation of incidents while avoiding actions that could be interpreted as paranoid or unprofessional by observers who were not aware of the coordinated nature of the opposition she was facing. The strategic countermeasures that Alexandra developed focused on rebuilding information access through alternative channels, re-establishing stakeholder relationships through direct communication, and implementing redundant verification systems that could ensure accurate data and consistent project parameters despite ongoing interference attempts. These responses required exceptional resourcefulness and political acumen while maintaining professional composure and collaborative team dynamics. The relationship recovery component of her crisis response involved strategic conversations with key allies who had been targeted by David Chen's misinformation campaign. Alexandra needed to address concerns that had been raised about her professional focus and team collaboration while providing alternative perspectives on her diversity advocacy and its relationship to business objectives. These conversations required careful balance between defensive explanations and proactive demonstration of continued commitment to client service and organizational success. The Pacific Industries project recovery efforts demanded extraordinary performance under pressure, as Alexandra worked to overcome artificial obstacles while delivering exceptional analytical work that could demonstrate her capabilities despite systematic attempts to ensure her failure. The challenge required her to exceed normal performance standards while managing additional stress and resource constraints that had been created through deliberate sabotage. The personal resilience required for navigating this crisis tested every aspect of Alexandra's character and professional development, while providing definitive evidence of her capacity for executive leadership under extremely challenging circumstances. Her response to systematic sabotage would determine not only the immediate outcomes of the Pacific Industries engagement, but also her future credibility and influence within Global Dynamics Corporation. The support system that Alexandra had carefully cultivated proved essential during this crisis period, as allies provided emotional encouragement, practical assistance, and strategic guidance that enabled her to maintain focus on solutions, rather than becoming overwhelmed by the scope and intensity of the opposition she was facing. The loyalty and commitment of these relationships during her most challenging period demonstrated the value of authentic collaboration and mutual support in achieving shared objectives despite organized resistance from entrenched interests. The crisis also revealed the sophisticated nature of organizational opposition to diversity initiatives, while providing compelling evidence that traditional approaches to workplace equality were insufficient for addressing systematic discrimination that operated through subtle but coordinated interference with normal business processes. The experience demonstrated that meaningful organizational change would require strategic thinking and political acumen that could anticipate and counter sophisticated resistance, while maintaining focus on positive outcomes that could benefit all organizational stakeholders. The pivotal transformation in Alexandra Martinez's understanding of her own capabilities occurred during the final preparation phase for the Pacific Industries presentation, when the accumulated pressure of systematic sabotage created circumstances that demanded exceptional leadership performance under extraordinary adversity. The crisis that had threatened to destroy her professional reputation instead became the catalyst for demonstrating executive competencies that transcended the analytical and strategic skills she had previously recognized as her primary strengths. This breakthrough moment represented a fundamental shift from defensive responses to coordinated attacks toward proactive demonstration of transformational leadership that could create positive outcomes despite organized opposition. The immediate challenge that precipitated this breakthrough involved discovering 72 hours before the critical client presentation that essential project data had been corrupted and backup systems had been compromised through what appeared to be systematic interference rather than technological failures. The scope of data loss encompassed financial models, competitive analyses, and implementation timelines that represented months of analytical work and formed the foundation of Global Dynamics' strategic recommendations for Pacific Industries' Technology Transformation Initiative. Alexandra's initial response to this crisis reflected the analytical problem-solving approach that had characterized her professional methodology throughout her career at Global Dynamics Corporation. She immediately began assessment procedures to determine the extent of data loss, identify potential recovery options, and develop contingency plans that could enable successful presentation delivery despite these technical obstacles. However, the magnitude of the challenge and the proximity of the client presentation deadline made traditional recovery approaches insufficient for achieving the level of excellence that the engagement demanded. The breakthrough moment emerged when Alexandra recognized that responding effectively to this crisis required leadership capabilities that extended far beyond individual analytical excellence to encompass comprehensive organizational coordination, stakeholder relationship management, and innovative problem-solving that could leverage collective expertise rather than relying solely on individual effort. This realization marked a fundamental transition from viewing herself as a highly competent individual contributor to understanding her potential as a transformational leader who could create extraordinary results through strategic vision and collaborative execution. The strategic response that Alexandra developed during the subsequent 48 hours demonstrated sophisticated understanding of organizational dynamics, resource allocation, and crisis management that revealed executive competencies she had not previously recognized or utilized comprehensively. Rather than attempting to recover lost data through traditional technical approaches, she implemented an innovative collaborative strategy that leveraged the diverse expertise and perspectives of team members who had been systematically excluded from previous coordination efforts due to David Chen's interference. This collaborative approach involved convening emergency strategy sessions that brought together technical specialists, industry experts, and client relationship managers who possessed complementary knowledge that could substitute for lost analytical work, while potentially creating superior recommendations through integrated perspectives that had not been available through traditional project management structures. Alexandra's leadership of these sessions required exceptional facilitation skills, strategic thinking under pressure, and the ability to synthesize diverse inputs into coherent strategic recommendations within extremely compressed timeframes. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.